Uh-huh. So I hope it is recording because I've clicked the button. So um, I don't need to introduce myself too much, but since I'm recording this and people might listen to the video for the first time, I need to say a word about myself. Um, my name is Joseph Mbele, a Tanzanian. I teach at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota. I'm in the English department. But for the purpose of this talk, I want to say I'm a cultural consultant, and I work with Africans and Americans, helping them to navigate cultural differences. And so this series of talks is one of those things that I do uh, in pursuit of that goal. So one of the things I've always been saying is this: we need these conversations. We absolutely need these conversations in the world as it is becoming a global village. There are many issues that we encounter because we now meet people of different cultures. We have to work together. We have to interact, whether we like it or not. No matter where we are in the world, we can be in a small town in Minnesota here, or you can be in my village in southern Tanzania. Um, you are likely to have people coming in from other parts of the world, from other cultures. You are likely to interact with them in some ways. And so, because we come from different cultures, there are challenges. I've been saying in these conversations that what happens is this: we grow up in our own culture, and everything appears, very natural, very normal. Everything we do, we just pick it up, and it's as easy as, learning to walk or learning to speak. That's how we assimilate the cultural values. We assume this is the way things are all over the world. The culture that we grew up in appears, very normal, no need to even talk about it. And then we build this notion that it's actually the norm. And that's where trouble starts. We actually grow up with the idea, and we are very unconscious of it, that the way we do things in our culture, that is the norm. And so when we go to another culture, when we go to another country with that mindset, and we see they do things differently, that's when we begin to have a lot of issues, a lot of questions. We are offended, we are irritated, we are intrigued, we are amused. It could be any amount of reactions. We consider the other people strange. We might think, they're doing the wrong things. They have no clue. They are very weird. That is the problem. But what we don't realize is that they too grow up in their own culture with the same mindset. Things are normal for them. Their culture is normal. They don't even think about it. But they also have the idea that their culture is the norm. The way they do things in their culture is the norm. So when they come to our country, they come to our culture, they have the same issues. They are surprised, they are offended, they are irritated, they have a lot of questions. It happened that way with me when I came to the United States to study for the first time. It was 1980. I came to Wisconsin, Madison, straight from Tanzania, you know, um, with my mindset already fixed because I grew up in that culture in Tanzania. And, that was the way things were done, and I come to Madison, Wisconsin, and I see all these strange ways of doing things, and I always had questions. Why do the Americans do this? Why do the Americans do this? You wonder why they talk the way they talk, you know, why they act the way they act. Again, this is an issue that faces all of us. If you're an American in Africa, in some community, some village in Africa, it's the same thing. You will look at the Africans and you will wonder why they do this, why they do that, why didn't they do this? Because again, you have the idea that your way is the right way. This is a fundamental problem. And so I think these conversations are very, very necessary. These cross-cultural conversations are very necessary for us to just explore our differences and to understand one another so that we are not offended, we are not irritated, we are not disappointed. Once we understand that, it's a matter of cultural differences, I think our lives could be different. We could be more comfortable. If we are in business relationships, we can actually conduct business, without all the friction that is there already all over the world. And so this is the fundamental reason I think, we need these conversations. And I'm glad, the people who have been attending, these conversations are with me on this. So today I wanted to talk again about the subject of money, just as an example of what I mean. Money in African and American culture. In my book, Africans and Americans Embracing Cultural Differences, I do say some things about money. There's a whole chapter titled Money Talks. One of the messages from that chapter is this, and I'm talking to Africans and Americans. One of the messages is this. When you Americans and you Africans are doing anything together, you are in a relationship, or you are doing business, or whatever it is, you have some kind of interaction, even such basic things as marriage or friendship, as long as money is involved, you need to be very careful because it could cause tremendous problems. Money is one of those things that easily cause problems between Africans and Americans. And so I am interested today in just giving a sense of why I say that. And it will be an opportunity by focusing on one item, money. It's an opportunity to see how complex these cultural differences can be and how easily they can cause real problems. A main observation that I start with is this. I think I understand Americans enough. The main observation is that Americans take money very seriously. Um, um, Americans have a different attitude towards money, uh, different from the attitude that Africans take. I think Americans take money very seriously, and they keep it. They really keep it. At least they do. They do want to keep it, to monitor, where it's going, how it's coming in, and how much they are spending. They have this business of keeping receipts, those kinds of things. They are very careful. I'm generalizing, of course, but that's the tendency that I see. And I compare it to the African way, and I see the Africans, yes, they look for money, they make money, they are interested in making money, but their attitude towards money is different. They don't really care much about keeping it and keeping track of every penny. If anything, I think Africans value money as a resource for building relationships, a resource for maintaining relationships. So they tend to, think about, oh, now I have money. I'll give it to some relative over there. I'll help my uncle over there. My sister's son doesn't have school fees. I'll send it over. Um, or they'll just throw a party. I have money, I'll throw a party and the whole neighborhood comes to have a lot of fun. And we derive a lot of satisfaction from being able to do that. Oh, yes. And it comes from our traditional African cultures. When we harvest, whether it's pumpkins or corn or potatoes or whatever the food is in our area, you harvest a lot of food crops, and naturally you tend to be very generous. You throw a big party. Um, uh, in our traditions, it's a kind of Thanksgiving, but it's a kind of Thanksgiving, but um, it's also a way of maintaining and building and sustaining these relationships with the neighbors, with everybody around you. Community is very important. Money is not something you keep for yourself. And that's a big difference again between the Americans and the Africans. So imagine you are an American and you are married to an African. Imagine you have money in the home, when it comes to spending, the African will have this tendency to give it away. There could be friction right there. We see it even in our families. Those of us who are African and we live in the USA, we raise our children here. The children grow up here, they are born here, they grow up, they are quite American, quite Americanized. When we say, oh, we need to send this money to an uncle in Africa, we need to send this money to our sister, the children wonder, why we should be sending our money over there all the time. So those of us who are African parents in this country can testify to this, that there are these differences. There are these differences. So for the Africans, spending like that, throwing money out there for people to enjoy, even at weddings, at parties, you see Africans, in some cultures, obviously they just throw money out there. Nigerians, if you attend their weddings, for example, that way you build honor in your society. You get praised for being generous. It's not a waste of money. Europeans who got to Africa, the early Europeans, when they saw these things, I could give some examples from Kenya. For example, Kenya. There's even a poem from Kenya on the coastal side of Kenya. It's called Utendi wa Nkunumbi. A white official, the person who was governing that area, he saw these Africans there throwing these huge parties, killing a lot of cows and just getting people, to enjoy themselves. And he thought this was very wasteful. He set about trying to stamp this custom. He thought it was wasteful. But for the Africans, this was not wasteful at all, because the Africans think about building what I call social capital. Instead of putting that money in a bank and letting it grow and grow and grow, the African will throw this party, but they are investing in the community. That's the concept of investing, social investing. You let people have a good time, they eat, they drink, they go home. Investing in the social networks, building social capital. That's the argument I make in my book. So those are the things, that at the bottom of this issue, and then, I will talk about specifics now. So when Americans go to Africa, for example, um, because they have a certain attitude towards money, and they know, again, from the perspective of their culture, that you need to have money, you need to have this much money, you need to keep your money. Yes, those kinds of values. So when they go to Africa, they have they have tended to see a lot of things which intrigue them, which they don't understand, and they pity the Africans sometimes. And so it's very common. They will say things like, oh, if they go to an African village, for example, some remote African villages, they will say, oh, these people are so poor. These people are so poor. They live on less than $1 a day. It's a common saying. These people are so poor. They live on less than $1 a day. Now, when I hear this, actually, I laugh when I hear this. Um, and I talk about this in my book also. Um, I remember my own life in the village in southern Tanzania. Um, um, I don't think we saw a lot of money. Sometimes we went a whole week without touching any money. We didn't need it. We didn't need to have that money every day. No, we didn't. We needed some money when we wanted to buy salt, which we don't make, shoes, which we don't make, um, um, oil, you know, for the lamps, those kinds of things, shirts, trousers. That's when we needed money. But the rest of the time, we had our chickens, we had our goats, we had cows, we had our food. We grew corn and beans and potatoes and all kinds of things. So why would we need money? Why would we need that dollar? So if somebody came and said we live on less than $1 a day, it doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Yeah, yeah. And yet we were very wealthy, living on less than $1 a day. The very idea of defining, your life in terms of how many dollars you spend a day, that already marks the difference. Um, we had our chickens. We didn't need $1 or a shilling. We had eggs. So that's one example. Another example would be this, and this is very common. Americans go to Africa again because they know, your money is your money. That's the way it should be, they think, because that's the way it is in their culture. My money is my money. So they go to Africa and then they encounter Africans in the streets, in the village, who always ask for money. Yes, they see this American and they ask for money. And Americans complain. Why are these Africans always asking for money? They were always asking for money. And I didn't have that much money. I didn't have that much money. I was so um, miserable because I couldn't satisfy every request. I was so miserable. And now I tell them, okay, look here. This is not as easy as you think it is. And so I have a lot of joy explaining this problem. Let me use the word problem, because for the American, this is a huge problem. It makes them miserable. Okay, so I tell them, when the Africans ask for money, don't assume they're actually asking for money. Um, they might not even mean it. They might just be teasing you. They might just be teasing you. Absolutely. Oh, yes. They might just be looking for an excuse to start a conversation. They might just be testing you to know what kind of person you are. Because Africans do want to talk with you and see, whether you are a good conversationalist, whether you like jokes, whether you are a fun person to talk to, you know. It's very important Africans do that, and then they judge you because they have experienced this conversation with you. Um, so, and there are many ways to start a conversation. They might ask you for money, not meaning what they are saying. And so, in my conversations about cultural differences, in fact, in this program of cross-cultural conversations, there was a day when I talked about communication. The topic was, does no mean no? I was saying, let's explore the way Africans talk. And then let's explore the way Americans talk. And I said, Americans are quite direct. You say what you mean. Uh-huh. You say what you mean. They are very direct. They really don't have much time to beat about the bush and to be indirect the way Africans do. Africans have plenty of time. And so it touches on the issue of time again in American and African culture. It touches on the issue of conversation in American and and African culture. The Africans might say something not actually meaning what they say. In the conversation about how people communicate, I said Africans could say no when they mean yes, and vice versa. So when they ask for money, you really need to spend time to understand whether they're really asking for money, whether they're just joking, speaking tongue in cheek, whether they are just testing you, to see, how you can handle a joke. So once you know the complications of this, as an American, you don't have to be miserable. Oh, they were always asking me for money. Oh, they think I'm an ATM. Some Americans have said that. They think I'm an ATM. All they see, I'm an ATM. That's a misreading. You know, if you're in Africa, just slow down. When people say something, they actually maybe just wanting a conversation. So you slow down, you have a conversation with them. In fact, you will finally figure out whether they really meant to ask for money or whether they were just joking. But it takes time, and Africans are never in a hurry. That's another thing. So this one thing, money, connects with other aspects of the culture. We are not in a hurry. That's why in my book, for example, there's a chapter called Time Flies, but not in Africa. So here I am talking about money, but you can see that topic, that issue. To understand it, you need to explore other dimensions of the culture, other dimensions of the culture. And that's why, again, I've said in these cross-cultural conversations, it's not enough to attend only one talk like this. No, it's not enough. You'll pick up a lot of stuff, but then you need to talk to come again, and then we talk about other dimensions. We come again, we talk about other dimensions, and then we see what a vast network is, this thing that we call culture. It's like a complex system. You just don't isolate one element and listen to one lecture like this, and that's it. No, 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 no. You need to come to the other topic, or you need to investigate another topic, you need to investigate another topic, and you see the interrelationships. That's how we get to know a culture. It has taken me many years to understand Americans, many years to begin to write about Americans. I didn't write a paragraph the first 5 years, the first 10 years. I wrote my first book 2000. I published it 2005, but that was many years after I'd lived with Americans to begin to understand the meanings, the nuances, the grammar, if I may use it. If I may use that phrase. So anyway, so those are some examples. Um, the same thing goes to when Americans go shopping. They go shopping, and they're in the market in Africa. Yes, they're in the market and they want to buy a chicken or a bunch of mangoes, 5, 6 mangoes. They go to the market and the vendor looks at them, and the vendor will say, "Oh, this mango costs $3. $3." And then the American pays $3, and later they discover actually that was not the price. They ask a Ghanaian neighbor, if it's in Ghana, for example, or a Tanzanian neighbor, and the neighbor will say, "Oh, that one is only 50 cents. We buy it for 50 cents." And so Americans begin to realize they are always charged, a higher price. And they get very frustrated. In East Africa, we use the word mzungu. Mzungu means a white person, but it can also mean any foreigner who doesn't speak the language, the Swahili language. A foreigner, mzungu. It means European, a white person, rather, white person, but it can be used to even an American who is not white, because your mannerisms, your way of speaking is very different, so you are mzungu. So they complain about the mzungu price. Why do I have to pay the mzungu price? Whenever I go to the market, I get charged more than the real price. Why do I have to pay the mzungu price? So there's this kind of irritation that they live with, and they don't like the place, they don't like the experience. But when they tell me this, when they come to me and saying they always charge me very high, I say, okay. Slow down. Let's talk about this. This is the politics of the marketplace now. The African vendor, when you come to their store or their table, wherever it is, they put their commodities, they look at you and they actually determine that you can pay a certain amount of money just by looking at you. Yeah, you look like somebody who has money. And so they put the price high. They believe you can afford it. Now, there's an American, when they say $3, you just assume it is $3. But the vendor, the African vendor, and every other African in the market, they know that you haggle. The vendor tells you the price, but it's subject to negotiation. Yes, the vendor is just testing the waters, if you like. And you start haggling, and haggling is very much part of the culture in the marketplace. Negotiation is very much part of the culture of the marketplace. You don't have to pay the $3. You start haggling, you mention a lower price, and there's that back and forth that goes on. And finally, you agree on a price. So complaining that they charged you this higher price, and you don't have to complain. It's only the starting point for a conversation, and you have to keep that in mind. And also, they don't charge you the higher price because you are an American. No, in fact, even I'm a Tanzanian. The way I look, that vendor will see me as somebody who can actually pay a higher price. So they charge me a high price as well. It might not be as high as the Mzungu price, but clearly they do know I have money just by looking at me. And again, haggling and haggling and haggling. And I tell the Americans that it's not about money in that African marketplace. It's not about money. It's not all about money. Um, it's also a place where you build relationships. Yes, the vendor expects to get to know you absolutely, and they get to know you in the process of haggling. In the process of haggling, you dispute the price, you mention yours, there will be questions. You'll be asked, oh, where are you from? But you look very rich, and this and that. And the other thing you will talk about family, you'll talk about what you are doing in that country. The vendor wants to know you, and they really appreciate that moment to just talk with you. And the more they know you, they are fascinated, they get to like you, they themselves will actually tell you, oh, pay this amount. And it will be a low amount. And you need to build a relationship with that vendor. Next time you come to that same market, go to that same vendor, they begin to see you as their friend. That's the African mindset. They now begin to see you as their friend. And you keep coming and you keep coming. And then they will invite you home to see their family. Absolutely. It's a very complicated thing. It's not just a matter of, here's something you want to buy, you grab it, you pay money, you go home. No, 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 no. Again, the Africans have the time for that. And as an American in Africa, you just need um, uh, to be there for the people because they want to be with you. In all these contexts, they want you. It's not so much your money. It's not so much your money, it's the relationship. And so I'm saying, the topic today is money in African and American culture. And the example I'm giving here is this. In the marketplace, it's not just a matter of here's a commodity, you grab it, you pay money, you go. No, 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 it's not as simple as that. It's not as simple as that. And so again, building relationships, building relationships, sustaining relationships, and this is what the Africans are looking for. This is what matters to the Africans. I will say maybe one or two other things, and then, as usual, we will open this for conversation, general conversation. So this attitude towards money, I said in the beginning, the Africans, yeah, they look for money, they value money, but not the same way the Americans do. And so, for example, and I've given this example before, I think I talk about it in my books also. The second book, Chickens in the Bus, has a lot also about money, and there will be other dimensions there, which I'm not going to talk about today. I said the African who has money somehow feels obliged to share it out. They somehow feel obliged to do that, and the society expects them to do that. And they gain, a lot of status in society by being generous like that. And so I want to mention just one more dimension of that. And that shocks Africans, when they're here in the USA, for example. If somebody who is rich, they lend somebody, who is, not as rich, some ordinary, maybe poor person, a certain amount of money, let's say $5. A rich person lends a poor African, let me use the word poor. I'll talk about poor later, how we define poverty. The rich person lends the African $5. and days go and the poor African doesn't pay the $5. Um, you can guarantee that rich African is not going to push that poor African to pay back the $5. Um, they definitely feel it's beneath them to do that. You know, I am a rich person. Why should I bother with $5? That's the mindset. You know, it, it's not worth it. I'm actually, lowering my dignity. So they wouldn't even care. They wouldn't even care. And so when those Africans come here, they might feel, they can play with money like that, and then they wake up, realizing that you pay everything you borrow here in America. You can borrow from a big corporation, like a, Microsoft corporation, um, and it could be just $5. Then they're not going to let you go. They will hound you and hound you and hound you. There will be penalties and threats and all kinds of things. It's a big shock to the Africans. It's a big, big shock. Um, um, Even things like, renting, an apartment in America. Uh, the African, is used to this thing, back in Africa. You're renting an apartment. The landlord knows you. You pay every month. You are a good, tenant. You pay regularly every month. And then there will be a month when maybe there is a funeral in your village. You go, and so you've spent the money on a funeral. You can come back and talk to the landlord and say, oh, this month I really, really cannot pay today. I will need another week or so. It's understood that you will be allowed to postpone the payment. It's just natural in the African culture. It's natural in the African culture to accommodate these kinds of things. Those poor Africans, they come to the USA, they can pay, every month for 20 years, and then suddenly they have an issue. They need to send money, say, to Cameroon, and then they try to approach the landlord. If they were late, for example, in paying, they come to realize there are no excuses here. The rent is due on a certain date. It has to be paid on that date. And so Africans end up being very miserable when they discover that this country works differently. They become very miserable. So talking about being miserable on account of money, Americans will be miserable in Africa because of the kinds of things I've talked about. But then Africans come to America and they become miserable because of what Americans consider to be normal things. In America, it's normal. You pay your rent, pay it on time. That's the normal thing. But then the Africans don't see it that way. So again, the point I made at the beginning was this. We grew up in our culture and everything is normal, and we assume that that is the norm. And we get the shock of our lives when we step out of our country, we step out of our culture and go live in another culture. And so these are some of the examples I wanted to, mention. Let me see. I have some notes here. Let me see if I have. Oh yeah, I'll give one more example. The issue of paying for services. The issue of paying. Okay, I'm an African. I came here with my African values. There was a day when I was at a store in my town, right here in Northfield, a small town, 20,000 people. I went to a store, one of these big stores where you go, you have your cart, your shopping cart, You put things in there, you put things in there, and then, you push your cart towards the place where you pay. Um, Now, ahead of me was an old lady, a white lady. It's a white town. An old white lady. She was struggling to push her cart. So I put my own cart aside and just, approached this old lady and said, "Let me help you." Yes, she let me push her cart. I pushed her cart. It was heavy. I pushed her cart to the cash register. And when I left it there, this old lady was already opening her purse, and she wanted to pay me. She was opening her purse. She wanted to pay me, and it was quite a shock to me that she would want to pay me. In my culture, this is an old lady, and we revere old people. We look at old people in a very special way. You help old people. That's your duty as a young person. And so I just did what was natural. I pushed her cart, helped her, and that was it. She was going to pay me. I had to refuse. I had to refuse, but I was shocked that she would want to pay me for that. So there are so many things, we do, and it's not about money. But for this old lady, it was already an issue of money. And for me, I wouldn't accept that money at all. I wouldn't accept that money. Um, in fact, in my book, I give another example. I give another example. Um, I talk about, I'm talking about this book now. I talk about myself as a researcher. I do research, in Africa. I record, our traditions. I go to various places in the villages and so on. And so you might talk to some very old lady in a village. She gives you stories from the past, you record them. And at the end, maybe an hour and a half, you have been there in that village talking to this lady or this old man. And in the end, of course, you want to say thank you, for the hospitality, for the help. I say in my book, I say in my book, um, from an American point of view, when it comes to that situation now, this old lady in Africa has helped you. She has given you information, history, folklore, whatever. And you have spent her 2 hours, and you do want to give something, as a thank you, maybe, or whatever. In Africa, we would say a thank you. And we don't think in terms of payment. And so I warn people in this book, I warn the Americans in this book, it will be very inappropriate to dip your hand in your pocket and produce, say, $50 and give them to the old lady in the village. Okay, thank you. Here is some $50. Uh, it would be inappropriate to do that. It would be inappropriate. It's a very delicate situation. And I talk about how I do it. I talk about how I do it. I talk about it in the book. So with this old man, I have kept him from his whatever, daily routine um, for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And now it's time for me to go. But I do want to thank this old man. I use the word thanking, not paying, not paying. Don't use the concept or the word pay. So I talk about it in the book. I say it's appropriate to go indirectly if the man, or I mean the old man or the old woman has maybe her son or her daughter there, you can pull that daughter aside, or that son, and give them some money and say, okay, can you please convey this to the old man? But they will have to do it their own way. And you don't just give money to that person. It has to be indirect like that. Or what I do, I begin by addressing the old man or the old lady. I say, oh, I'm so grateful. You have helped me. You have given me so much. And I feel ashamed. I've kept you here in the sun. I never even brought you any water, something to moisten your throat. You start with a little speech like that, apologizing profusely. And then at that point, it might be appropriate. If you have some money, you can hold it, but you don't show it. You can hold it in a fist like this, and then you reach for the old man's hand and give it to them, and nobody sees, you're giving them like $10 or something. It's appropriate to hide it like that, but with a speech which explains that you really feel bad, you have kept them there, and you have not been so good, you didn't even bring them water. And so you can say, oh, here is a little beer. In my culture, it's okay to call that money a little beer. Oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't bring anything, but here is a little beer. You're speaking indirectly, you are beating about the bush. You never say, I am paying you. You never say, this is payment. Yes, you beat about the bush, you are vague, you are going roundabout like that. That's culturally appropriate, at least in my culture. And yet, you can actually give that money now, having defined it as something else. Here is a little beer. Okay. Then it will be accepted. It will be accepted because it's all about the dignity of that person. If you just pull out money and give it to that old man, it's actually very inappropriate. It's very inappropriate. In fact, it could be insulting. And let me add one note here, and I'll stop and then wait for a conversation. There's a story. There's a story, you might have seen it or you might want to Google it. There's the American musician, 50 Cent, the African American guy. You probably know 50 Cent, very famous. I think he's a rap artist or something. 50 Cent. There's a story, I believe it is true, it's been reported everywhere. Um, I think it was a movie that he made, and he called it Things Fall Apart. Yes, Things Fall Apart. Now, the whole world knows there's a Nigerian writer, perhaps the most famous African writer, Chinua Achebe. He passed away a few years ago. He was an old man. Yes, he passed away a few years ago. But before he died, 50 Cent did this thing and was calling it Things Fall Apart. Now, the Nigerian writer, Chinua Achebe, had written a novel published in 1958. This is perhaps the most famous African novel, perhaps the most famous. It's read all over the world. It has sold millions of copies, more than 10 million. It's been translated in more than 60 languages. And the novel is called Things Fall Apart. The whole world knows about that novel. The story is that Chinua Achebe got to know about this project, and his lawyers told 50 Cent he couldn't use that title. He couldn't use that title, Things Fall Apart. And indeed, the case was overwhelming, and it is said that 50 Cent offered Chinua Achebe, I don't know whether it was $1 million or whatever, or $10 million, I forget the figure. It was a lot of money. 50 Cent, with an American mindset, wanted to just solve this issue, and he sent that that amount of money to Chinua Achebe. Achebe felt insulted. He refused the money. He not only refused the money, he felt insulted. Of course, 50 Cent never intended to insult this old man. But this is not just any old man. This is an African old man. You don't just write them a check. It doesn't matter whether the old man has no money. It could be an old man who has no penny, not a dime in their house. They will refuse that $1,000 or $10,000 because their dignity is everything. You can Google this story, 50 Cent, Chinua Achebe. I swear you'll read it. It said Chinua Achebe refused it. And I understand fully why he would refuse it. As an African, I would never do that myself. I would never do that myself. I would never simply write a check. Old man, here's a $50 million check. I would never do it because I know it would be adding insult to injury. So again, these are some few examples to, establish the point that money is one of those issues that can cause real misunderstandings, between Africans and Americans. And I've just given you a few examples, and I would like to stop here. And we'll have some questions if you have some questions. If you want, I can shut off the recording so that once again you are free to just talk. I've not been recording these talks. It's only today I wanted to, partly because I thought, actually, it was one of you who suggested that I do this, and I agreed, partly because I thought I could use this video, for other people who have not been able to make it to this event, or maybe it will inspire them to attend and just to read, some of these things that I've been writing. And also, one advice I've been giving is this. If you are an American, say in Africa, and you are challenged, by all the things that Africans do, and you are very inconvenienced, maybe, you are irritated and all this, ask yourself a lot of questions. Why they do this? Why do they do this? I always advise, get together. If you are in Africa, for example, get together with the Africans who have lived in the USA. Get together with those Africans so they can tell you how it was for them being in the USA. Then you can have a really meaningful conversation. Like in Tanzania, we have Americans there, and I want them to sit together with Tanzanians who have lived in the USA. It would be a great thing if we could all do this wherever we are. And Americans, before they go to Africa, when you are still in Michigan, you are still in Oklahoma, and you are planning to go to Africa, my idea is get together some Africans who are already here in the USA and listen to their stories of cultural challenges right here in Minnesota. It will prepare you by giving you another perspective on what it is you are going to face in the other culture. So again, maybe I should shut off this thing and then we can open it up. Should I shut it off? I think, let me see. Where do I stop? Oh yeah, it says stop recording. Okay, I'm hitting the button. It's been a pleasure talking with you all, but I'll shut off the recording so we can have a conversation.